When humanity faced the threat of complete annihilation, they did not surrender. They changed the very nature of war. Through intelligence, adaptation, and resilience, they dismantled ancient empires, not by conquest, but by transforming the galaxy itself. They built not an empire of fear, but a network of alliances founded on mutual growth and survival. Every new world welcomed into the Accord became not a subject, but a partner in building a shared future. And as humanity stepped into the endless stars, they proved that true strength lies not in destruction, but in the infinite ability to rise again. Stay with us if you want to see how the story ends, and don't forget to subscribe. The Melvian system had known peace for millennia. 12 inhabited planets orbited their twin suns in perfect harmony, their crystalline cities gleaming beneath endless lavender skies. The Melvians themselves were a race of grace and beauty, tall and willowy, their skin shifting in iridescent colors like living opals under sunlight. Long before many species had mastered fire, the Melvians had already conquered art, philosophy, and science. Their civilization was a masterpiece carved into the heart of the cosmos. But peace, as the universe so often proves, is a fragile thing. 8 years ago, the Zarkin came. They arrived not with diplomats or traders, but with warships so vast and numerous they blotted out the stars. The Zarkin were conquerors by nature and by tradition, their empires spanning over 100 star systems. Massive beings standing 12 feet tall, armored in natural chitin and resistant even to plasma fire, they overwhelmed civilizations with brute force and devoured their culture as trophies. The Melvians fought. Despite their pacifist leanings, they were not helpless. Their energy shields could withstand devastating bombardments. Their crystal-based weapons could pierce even the thickest armor. But against the relentless tide of the Zarkin war machine, it wasn't enough. One by one, their worlds fell, their crystalline cities reduced to smoldering ruins, their songs of peace drowned beneath the thunder of conquest. Now, standing aboard the last free Melvian space station, Ambassador Taylor watched debris from the latest battle drift past the observation deck. His skin shifted to a deep blue, the color of profound sorrow among his people. 8 years of endless war had aged him far beyond his centuries. Behind him, a young aide approached, her skin flickering nervously with yellow hues. "Ambassador," she said, bowing slightly. "We've received a response to our distress call." Taylor turned, hope flickering weakly in his 3 hearts. They had sent pleas across the galaxy, desperate messages screaming for aid. Most were met with silence, others with apologies steeped in fear. Few dared oppose the Zarkin Empire. "Who answered?" he asked, voice roughened by years of disappointment. The aide hesitated, her skin pulsing in orange confusion. "A species from the outer rim. They call themselves humans." Taylor's skin shifted to curious green. He had heard of humans only in passing, a young race, primitive by galactic standards, rumored to dwell at the fringe of the known universe. "What did they say?" The aide fidgeted. "They said, they'll be here in 3 standard cycles. They ask us to hold out for just 3 more days." 3 days? After 8 years of war, what difference could 3 days make? The answer came exactly on schedule. A single ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Taylor's sensors struggled to identify it. It was unlike any craft he'd seen before, sleek and curved, almost organic in design, in stark contrast to the angular brutality of Zarkin warships. It was smaller even than a Melvian patrol cutter, barely 100 meters long. A communication channel opened. On the screen appeared the image of a human, smaller than a Melvian, their brown skin smooth, their dark hair framing a face alive with endless microexpressions. They radiated an energy, a stubborn vitality that was hard to define. "Ambassador Taylor," said the human, her voice steady and confident. "I'm Commander Alina Santiago of the Earth Space Force. We received your distress call." Taylor's skin flushed deep purple with embarrassment. "Commander, I thank you for responding, but I fear there has been a misunderstanding. The Zarkin fleet numbers in the thousands. Perhaps you should withdraw before." Alina Santiago smiled. It wasn't the smile of someone about to die. It was the smile of someone who knew something no one else did. "Ambassador, I understand your concern, but I need you to trust me. We've studied the Zarkin. We know how they fight, and we know how to beat them. In 8 years, we have found no weakness," Taylor protested. "Because you were looking at the problem the wrong way," Santiago replied calmly. "The Zarkin are a hammer. They expect every opponent to be a nail. But humans? We're different." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp. "Give us 3 hours, Ambassador. Just 3 hours, and this war will be over." Taylor wanted to argue, to explain the impossibility of her claim. But something in her voice, in her eyes, held him still. 3 days ago, They had been facing inevitable extinction. What was 3 more hours? Very well, Commander, he said. 3 hours. What do you need from us? Nothing but your attention, Santiago said. And perhaps your medical teams, not for casualties, but for treating shock when your people see what humans can do. The channel closed. Around Taylor, his staff murmured in disbelief. Their skin flashed confused yellows and skeptical grays. 3 hours to end an 8-year war? Madness. But as Taylor would soon learn, humans had a very special relationship with madness. They didn't fear it. They weaponized it. The lone human ship began to move, not directly toward the Zarkan fleet as everyone expected, but instead weaving through the thick debris field left by countless battles. Zarkan sensors detected the small vessel immediately and dispatched a squadron of fighters to eliminate it, assuming it was a lone scout, perhaps a desperate act of defiance. That was their first mistake. The human ship didn't fire weapons. Instead, it began broadcasting a signal on all channels, not shield harmonics or threat vectors, but music. Strange, rhythmic pulses of sound that rippled through space, resonating off the wreckage. The Zarkan fighters hesitated, confused by the unexpected tactic. And hesitation, in warfare, is fatal. From within the debris field, dozens of objects, previously dismissed as inert wreckage, sprang to life. They weren't debris at all. They were drones. Tiny, no larger than a Melvian's hand, each moving with perfect coordination. The drones swarmed the fighters like a cloud of angry insects. Zarkan shields, built to resist energy and missiles, were useless against the sheer kinetic impact of hundreds of tiny devices slamming into sensitive joints and engines. Within minutes, the entire fighter squadron was crippled, drifting helplessly through the void. But this was only the beginning. The human ship continued its dance through the system, and with every movement, new surprises revealed themselves. Asteroid miners, thought abandoned, activated and launched modified charges. Communication satellites, previously ignored, began broadcasting interference patterns that scrambled Zarkan fleet coordination. Taylor watched in amazement as the humans unfolded layer after layer of a plan so intricate, so patient, that it defied comprehension. They hadn't arrived 3 days ago. They had been preparing for years, perhaps longer. How? Taylor whispered, all blooming in his voice. How did we not see this? His aide, her skin now a bright, awestruck white, answered softly. Because we weren't looking for it. The humans thought differently. While Melvians and Zarkan waged a conventional war of attrition, the humans built a different battlefield. A battlefield the Zarkan couldn't even recognize until it swallowed them whole. They hadn't brought overwhelming force. They had brought overwhelming creativity. And as the 3-hour mark approached, Taylor realized, with a chill running through all three of his hearts, that the entire system itself had become a weapon. And the Zarkan had walked straight into it. The trap closed around the Zarkan fleet with terrifying precision. It started small, localized gravity anomalies around the system's asteroid belts. Subtle at first, barely noticeable against the background pull of twin suns. But soon, the anomalies magnified, gravitational nodes folding the very fabric of space into whirlpools of invisible force. Zarkan dreadnoughts, designed for brute linear propulsion, struggled to maintain formation. Their massive engines roared, overcompensating against gravitational drag they didn't understand. Collisions began, not from enemy fire, but from the panicked reactions of their own commanders. Flagships clipped support vessels, tearing armor and bleeding fuel into the void. Frigates spun helplessly into asteroid fields whose trajectories had been altered just enough to turn random rocks into precision-guided missiles. Still the Zarkan pressed forward, their instinct hardwired for aggression. Still they failed to see the larger design. Above the chaos, Commander Alina Santiago's ship coasted silently along the outer edges of the battlefield. She gave no orders to fire, no commands to charge. Instead, she watched the dance unfold. Her hands moved across her console with the calm precision of an artist finishing a masterpiece. Initiate protocol cascade, she said softly. The computer acknowledged with a chime. All across the system, hidden code embedded in decades-old Melvian infrastructure woke from its long slumber. Mining platforms exploded, not with destructive force, but with carefully directed electromagnetic pulses. Zarkan sensor arrays went dark. Navigation became guesswork. Missile tracking failed. In the confusion, human-engineered stealth drones deployed viral packets into Zarkan command ships. The viruses didn't shut down their systems. They did something worse. They altered threat recognition parameters, making Zarkan ships appear hostile to each other's automated defense grids. The mighty fleet, once a singular force of destruction, turned on itself. Point defense turrets opened fire on adjacent vessels. Escort ships broke off formation to pursue phantom threats. In the observation deck of the last free Melvian station, Ambassador Taylor watched as an empire collapsed not from enemy guns, but from the weaponization of their own fear. His skin shimmered bright gold, the Melvian color of disbelief. No shots fired from the human ship. No grand displays of force. Only silent chaos. Only entropy. Only pure, merciless strategy. The Zarkan flagship, the dreadnought Gorvrex, attempted to rally the remnants of its fleet. Supreme Commander Hordhack, massive and scarred from 100 campaigns, barked orders across still-functioning comms. Regroup at Sector Gamma. Crush the source of interference. Kill the humans. His subordinates scrambled to obey. But as they moved, another human contingency plan triggered. Artificial singularity mines, seeded into the very Lagrange points of the system, activated. Space itself twisted. Tides of gravitational compression ripped apart formation lines. Ships were torn open like paper against a storm. The Gorvrex barely escaped the initial wave, but by then, its fleet was reduced to a disorganized rabble. Commander Santiago opened a wideband channel. Her voice, cool and measured, echoed across the remains of the Zarkan fleet. This is Commander Alina Santiago of the Earth Space Force. You have lost. You were never fighting us. You were fighting your own assumptions. She paused. Humanity doesn't conquer by force. We survive by thinking 10 moves ahead. Her voice softened, almost compassionate. You should have read our history before you decided to make us your enemy. The channel closed. And with it, so did the last hope of the Zarkan. Supreme Commander Hordhack, staring at the burning wreckage of his once mighty fleet, finally understood the enormity of his mistake. The Melvians had been a beautiful conquest. The humans were something else entirely. A species not defined by their weakness, but by their refusal to accept defeat. By their capacity to turn every disadvantage into an advantage. By their terrifying, relentless adaptability. Hordhack knew then that the Zarkan Empire was not just losing this battle. It was facing extinction. Because humans didn't just fight wars. They rewrote them. On Callisto Station, Taylor received the final transmission from the battlefield. Data streams flooded in casualty reports, wreckage trajectories, intercepted Zarkan command orders dissolving into chaos. He stood in stunned silence. In 3 hours, a war that had consumed 8 years of Melvian lives had ended without a single direct assault. No mass slaughter. No planetary bombardments. Only the methodical dismantling of an enemy that believed themselves invincible. Around him, Melvians wept openly, their skins flashing brilliant, chaotic rainbows of emotion. For the first time in nearly a decade, they felt something they had almost forgotten. Hope. Taylor opened a private channel to the human ship. Commander Santiago appeared almost immediately. He bowed low, his body language one of profound respect. Commander, he said, his voice thick with emotion, how can we ever repay what you have done? Santiago smiled gently. You don't owe us anything, Ambassador. She leaned closer to the feed, her eyes fierce. But remember this moment. Because someday, somewhere, when the next force comes believing they can crush what we build, you will tell them. You will tell them about today. You will tell them about humanity. And then she closed the channel. The Melvian archives would later record the Battle of Melvian Prime not as a military victory, but as a turning point. A moment when the galaxy realized that the most dangerous weapon was not a fleet, not a superweapon, not even fear. It was a mind that refused to yield, a mind sharpened by adversity, a mind born on a world where survival was never guaranteed, and because of that, was always earned. A human mind. The collapse of the Zarkan fleet rippled through the galactic community like a shockwave. At first, there was disbelief. No one could comprehend how a species so dominant, so brutally efficient, had been unmade by a force that barely fired a shot. Then came fear. If humans could dismantle the Zarkan, what else could they do? What other powers, long thought untouchable, might find themselves vulnerable to the quiet, relentless force of Earth's children? Worlds that had once ignored humanity now rushed to update their intelligence dossiers. Treaties long delayed were suddenly signed. Trade deals once thought impossible were pushed through in record time. And behind every new signature, every cautious handshake, lay a simple, unspoken truth. Humanity had proven itself indispensable and terrifying. On Callisto Station, now an emergent hub for diplomatic activity, Sarah Chin, Alina Santiago, and a select few other human strategists convened. They sat at a simple round table, no emblems, no grand banners. Before them lay projections of 1,000 different worlds, cultures, and power structures, a galactic chessboard waiting for new rules. We have their attention, Santiago said, her voice steady. Chin nodded. But we don't have their trust. Volov, leaning back with arms crossed, grunted. Trust is built over centuries. Fear? That we have today. Chin tapped the table, pulling up a schematic. No, she said quietly. Fear won't last. She gestured to the projection. It showed the slow but inevitable spread of influence from the outer rim to the core sectors. If we want to secure a future for ourselves and those willing to stand with us, we need something better than fear. She looked around the table, her gaze sharp. We need reliability. Thus was born the Foundation Accords. A simple, revolutionary idea. No forceful annexations. No coerced alliances. Only partnerships built on mutual survival, trade, and adaptive strength. Any species could join. Each would retain autonomy. Each would contribute, not just resources, but knowledge. In exchange, humanity would offer what no other power dared promise: protection through innovation, security through unpredictability, a future built on evolution, not conquest. And across the stars, battered civilizations, some still smoldering from Zarkan raids, others long cowed by ancient empires, listened. And they came. First a trickle, then a flood. The first assembly of the Accord convened 6 months later. Delegates from 67 worlds gathered on neutral ground, an abandoned Zarkan outpost, repurposed as a symbol of the new order. Saracen stood at the inaugural podium, her voice amplified not by grandeur, but by clarity. We are not rulers. We are not conquerors. We are the architects of a new kind of survival, one where the weak are shielded by the strong, and the strong are made stronger by the wisdom of the many. We will not build an empire. We will build a network, resilient, adaptive, unbreakable. The hall erupted in a standing ovation, not because of forced loyalty, because of earned hope. Meanwhile, the remnants of the old order festered in the shadows. A coalition of surviving Zarkan warlords, rogue powers, and frightened oligarchies dubbed humanity's rise as the silent invasion. They saw in Earth not saviors, but an existential threat to the hierarchy that had kept them powerful. They began to plot. Whispers of a counteroffensive circulated through the dark web of galactic communication arrays. Secret weapon programs. Saboteurs embedded within Accord colonies. Coordinated disinformation campaigns aimed to fracture humanity's alliances before they fully solidified. They thought they could stem the tide before it grew unstoppable. They were wrong. Because while they schemed in the old ways, blunt force, deception, intimidation, humanity was already moving to the next phase. They were not merely building a network. They were embedding resilience into the very DNA of the galaxy. On the frontier worlds, new adaptations blossomed. Terraforming projects accelerated with hybridized Melvian human technology. Food security matrices ensured no Accord world could be starved into submission. Distributed AI defense grids, impossible to disable centrally, protected every station, every colony. Humans didn't create vulnerabilities. They eliminated them. Where ancient empires had centralized power, humans decentralized it. Where old conquerors demanded tribute, humanity demanded collaboration. And in doing so, they planted seeds that no amount of military force could uproot. On Earth, in the Great Hall of the New Assembly, a plaque was mounted above the entrance. It bore no names. Only a single phrase, carved deep into obsidian. Adapt, endure, build. Visitors from 100 species passed under it daily, some reading it with wonder, some with quiet terror. Because they understood now, humanity had not come to rule. They had come to reshape destiny itself. And no one could stop them. Not with fleets, not with armies, not even with fear. The first true strike came not from the crumbling remnants of the Zarkan, but from within. Saboteurs, trained operatives from ancient houses that had once ruled by blood and terror, infiltrated key Accord installations. They didn't arrive in armadas. They arrived as workers, as traders, as refugees. And when they struck with precision. Hydroponic facilities collapsed under engineered blights. Subspace relays were corrupted with cascading failures. Gravity stabilizers aboard frontier stations failed for mere minutes, but enough to cause chaos, injury, fear. It wasn't open war. It was death by 1,000 cuts. And for the first time since Callisto, humanity faced something it had not yet mastered. An enemy willing to destroy the foundations instead of capturing the towers. On Concordia Station, the nerve center of the Accord's growing communication lattice, Alina Santiago oversaw crisis response. Reports flooded in. Outages. Riots. Whispers of betrayal. Humanity's enemies had learned a terrible lesson from their own defeat. If you couldn't beat humans on the battlefield, you beat them with their own creations, networks, dependencies, trust. But what the saboteurs didn't understand was simple. Humans were not defined by their infrastructure. They were defined by their response to collapse. Within hours, counter-protocols activated. Autonomous repair drones, seeded years ago in anticipation of disaster, deployed in silent waves. Localized AI cells rerouted systems through redundant subchannels built specifically to survive sabotage. Civilians, not soldiers, became first responders. On colony worlds, farmers rebuilt comm towers from scavenged parts. Children recalibrated hydroponics manually, following emergency manuals encoded into every school system. Elders organized food distribution using ancient Earth techniques, rationing, mutual aid, trust. The attacks, designed to break, instead galvanized. Across the Accord, species that had once relied on human ingenuity now learned to mirror it. Not because they were ordered to, because they understood. The true legacy of humanity was not power. It was resilience born of catastrophe. Santiago watched it unfold on her monitors, a grim smile tugging at her lips. They thought they were cutting off the head, she said to Chen over secured comms. But there is no head, Chen replied, her voice low. Only 1,000 hands rebuilding faster than they can destroy. In the shadows of the Accord's resurgence, the architects of the sabotage panicked. Their plan had not weakened humanity's alliances. It had strengthened them. Worlds that had hesitated to join the Accord flooded its embassy channels with urgent requests for membership. Even former rivals realized, if humanity could survive targeted systemic collapse without descending into anarchy, then humanity's model wasn't just strong. It was unbreakable. The surviving warlords convened one last time on a shattered Zarkan fortress world, a place of rusted monuments and decaying thrones. There, in the dying light of a blood-red sun, they made a final, desperate decision. No more subtlety. No more sabotage. They would launch a direct assault. One final gambit to crush the Accord before it grew beyond reach. A coalition fleet, battered but vast, began assembling. Old dreadnoughts, pirate carriers, hijacked orbital platforms repurposed into crude weapons. A force large enough to blot out the stars above the nascent Accord. They knew it was a gamble. They knew they had little chance. But they also knew, delay any longer, and humanity's network would grow too strong to ever uproot. Better to die striking than to live under Earth's shadow. Across the Accord, preparations began, but not in the way old empires expected. There were no desperate calls for reinforcements, no feverish arms buildups. Instead, each world began preparing itself, not as a fortress to be defended, but as a weapon to be wielded. Terraformers retooled their atmosphere generators into adaptive shields. Agricultural hubs converted irrigation systems into planet-wide suppression nets. Orbital habitats rerouted mining lasers into coordinated defense webs. And everywhere, civilians trained. Not for open battle, for survival, for resistance, for rebirth, if necessary. Because humanity's greatest strength had infected the stars themselves. You can destroy a city, you can raise a planet, but you cannot kill an idea once it has taken root. In the heart of Callisto Station, Sarah Chin reviewed the final projections. She stood silent for a long time. Then she issued the simplest order of her life. Let them come. She closed the tactical displays, stepped out onto the viewing deck, and watched as the distant darkness bloomed with hostile energy signatures. Dozens, hundreds, thousands. It didn't matter. Because humanity had already won the only war that mattered. Not for territory, not for glory, but for the right to exist on their terms, in their way, unbroken and unbowed. The galaxy held its breath. The final storm was coming. And for the first time in its ancient, war-torn history, it wondered. What happens when the storm faces something it cannot uproot? What happens when the unstoppable force meets the unyielding will? It was about to find out. The enemy fleet arrived not as a single unified force, but as a roiling, chaotic tide, pirate lords, broken warlords, mercenary clans, all bound together by desperation rather than loyalty. Their ships blackened the edge of known space like a cancer spreading across healthy flesh. The galaxy watched, transfixed. This was the final test. If humanity and its Accord fell now, the dream of a new order would collapse with them. If they endured, nothing would ever be the same again. Commander Alina Santiago stood aboard the Endeavor's bridge, her uniform crisp, her mind razor-sharp. Admiral Volov coordinated from the flagship USS Aegis, while Chen remained on Callisto, overseeing the master network. They had prepared for this moment for years. No single battle plan, no monolithic strategy. Instead, millions of contingency webs woven across hundreds of worlds. The moment the enemy fleet crossed the critical boundary, the first trap sprung. Gravitic distorters embedded in the outer asteroid belts activated, twisting natural debris into lethal torrents that tore through the leading ranks of the attackers. Massive fusion torches hidden within orbital mining stations fired concentrated bursts at pre-calculated angles, forcing enemy ships to scatter into pre-prepared kill zones. Then came the decentralized Aegis defense arrays, networks of stealth satellites that deployed microdrones in coordinated waves. The drones didn't aim to destroy. They aimed to disable. Power cores were drained. Life support hacked. Munitions jammed mid-flight, detonating uselessly in the void. Ships designed for brute strength found themselves clawing against a battlefield that refused to obey their expectations. They fired into space, into ghosts, into nothing. And the humans didn't engage them directly, not yet. They let the storm rage. They let confusion rot the core of their enemy. Because they knew the oldest, hardest truth of warfare. You don't defeat your enemy by fighting them where they are strong. You defeat them by making their strength irrelevant. The enemy's second wave pressed forward, more disciplined, less panicked. They adapted. They learned. But so did humanity. Every tactical adjustment by the attackers was mirrored and countered not by brute force, but by prediction. Adaptive AI fleets, fueled by live data from thousands of Accord worlds, shifted faster than any admiral could plan. Countermeasures evolved within minutes, sometimes seconds. It was no longer a war of ships. It was a war of minds. And humanity had long ago learned how to fight when the only winning move was to think faster than the universe itself. Still, despite their losses, the enemy pushed. They reached the inner defenses. They battered the forward bastions. They sacrificed ships like pawns, seeking one opening, one crack in the wall. And in one brutal, horrifying hour, they found it. A forgotten maintenance conduit on Concordia Station, rerouted during emergency repairs weeks earlier, became a breach point. Enemy shock teams poured through. They overwhelmed the outpost garrison. They slaughtered civilians. They planted flags dripping with blood and ruin. It should have been a turning point. It should have broken the Accord's will. But it didn't. Because at the heart of every Accord world, every colony, every station, there was something more powerful than hope. There was preparation. Within 20 minutes, Concordia's backup AI initiated a total structural lockdown. Atmospheric pressure was vented in targeted sections. Zero-gravity combat protocols activated, protocols that human engineers had designed specifically for asymmetric, insurgency-style fighting. Every civilian who could hold a weapon, even improvised ones, fought with the calm precision of those who had rehearsed this nightmare 1,000 times. Maintenance drones, janitorial bots, medical servitors, all repurposed into combat auxiliaries. The attackers were not facing soldiers. They were facing a society that refused to accept defeat as even a hypothetical outcome. And the attackers, so used to easy conquests, realized with mounting horror. They weren't fighting for victory. They were fighting for survival. By the time full Accord reinforcements arrived, Concordia civilian defense grids had already retaken 80% of the station. The shock troopers, elite forces of dying empires, surrendered, not because they were outgunned, because they were outwilled. Captured communications revealed the terror that had spread through their ranks. They hadn't been prepared for a galaxy that no longer broke under pressure. A galaxy taught by humanity to bend, to flex, to absorb every blow, and then strike back harder than ever. With the fall of the Concordia raiding force, the enemy coalition crumbled. Entire fleets mutinied. Warlords fled. Mercenaries defected en masse, offering intelligence, surrender, anything to avoid facing the unstoppable tide. And humanity's answer was simple. No vengeance. No mass executions. Only choice. Adapt. Join. Or be forgotten. In the final session of the War Council, Saracen addressed the Accord representatives. Not from a throne. Not from a tower. From a simple dais, surrounded by banners stitched from the emblems of every Accord world. Her voice carried across 1,000 systems. This was never about domination. This was never about revenge. This was about survival and what comes after. She paused, letting the words settle like anchors in the hearts of those listening. We are no longer many worlds afraid of the dark. We are the light. And we will never let that light be extinguished again. The chamber erupted in a thunder of voices, not as separate species, but as a singular force, bound by choice, by conviction, by the relentless will to endure. Above Callisto Station, the enemy fleet disintegrated into fading embers. And the stars burned brighter than they ever had before. Because the future no longer belonged to the strongest. It belonged to the ones who refused to let go. The ones who adapted. The ones who endured. The ones who built a new galaxy, not with chains, but with hands outstretched to lift everyone who dared rise with them. The war was over. Not with the grand final battles of ancient legend. Not with flags planted in conquered soil. It ended in silence. In the quiet acknowledgement by 1,000 systems that the old way, the way of fear, of domination, of endless conquest, was dead. The galaxy had turned its face towards something new. Towards something human. The Accord grew not like an empire, but like a living, breathing organism. New worlds joined daily. Old enemies became allies. Even some of the broken warlords, stripped of their fleets and thrones, found new purpose working alongside the very peoples they once sought to enslave. Because the foundation had been laid not on power or fear, but on resilience. On the understanding that the future belonged to those who could survive the worst and still choose to build something better. Humanity didn't rule the galaxy. They guided it. Like farmers tending wild fields. Like teachers shaping students. Like architects designing structures that could stand against any storm. Callisto Station became the beating heart of this new order. No longer just a fortress. No longer merely a symbol. It became a nexus of culture, of innovation, of shared dreams. Every corridor echoed with languages from 100 species. Every viewing deck looked out not on borders and battle lines, but on open, endless stars. It wasn't perfect. There were conflicts. There were disagreements. But they were solved not with war fleets, but with councils. Not with fire, but with dialogue. Because the greatest victory humanity had won wasn't against the Zarkin. It wasn't against warlords or sabotage. It was against despair. They had proven that adaptation wasn't just survival. It was evolution. It was transcendence. In her later years, Saracen lived quietly on the restored plains of Mars, teaching at the Accord Academy. She refused statues. She refused parades. But on the anniversary of the Battle of Melvian Prime, the battle that started it all, students from every species sent her small tokens, handmade crafts, translated poems, simple letters with one message, and thousands of different scripts. Thank you. When she finally passed, not in battle, but peacefully beneath twin Martian moons, her body was not buried. It was scattered across the stars by a ship named Continuum, a ship powered by hybrid technology born from every Accord species. Its course was simple. Forward. Always forward. Into the unknown. Into possibility. Generations later, children born on worlds that never knew the terror of the old empires would gather under starlit skies. And they would tell stories. Stories of the humans. The stubborn primates from a forgotten blue planet who refused to accept extinction. Who rewrote the rules of survival. Who built a future from the shattered bones of the past, not just for themselves, but for everyone willing to adapt, endure, and build. And the children would understand, deep in their blood and bones, that their future had been bought not by conquest, but by an idea. An idea stronger than fear, stronger than hatred, stronger than the void itself. The idea that no matter how dark the night became, there is always a way forward. There is always a chance to rise. And those who refuse to yield will always find the stars waiting for them.